right now, joining us from biggovernment.com. Very pleased to have with us Dr. AWR Hawkins as we take another look at an issue that so far has not played much a role in the presidential primaries. But I got to say, Dr. Hawkins, as we learn more and more about Operation Fast and Furious and what this Justice Department has done, the idea that this is not going to have any sort of impact in the general election, I think looks increasingly silly. I think the only thing that's going to keep this from being an issue in the general election is if the mainstream media continues to do the shoddy job of reporting that they've been doing.
Oh, I agree with you, Cam. Good evening.
Good evening.
I believe, I think things are turning, though. I mean, as I've looked, and I would say you probably share this opinion, since Friday of last week, which was the last document dump for the DOJ, it seems like we've learned more in these last 4 days than perhaps we've learned in the last 4 weeks and maybe even the last 2 months. And the things we've learned are so significant that I believe the pressure has ratcheted up considerably on Holder.
I would agree with you, and I think that the Friday night document dump that we saw from the Justice Department, I think will only ratchet up the pressure even more because, once again, we saw an email exchange that, while it's not a smoking gun, just common sense tells you that there has to be more to the story. The U.S. Attorney for Arizona, the former U.S. Attorney, now former U.S. Attorney, Dennis Burke, the night that Brian Terry is murdered, emails Eric Holder's deputy chief of staff and says a Border Patrol agent was shot 18 miles inside of the border, follows it up a few hours later and says the Border Patrol agent has died. Holder's deputy chief of staff responds and says, I've told the Attorney General, let us know if there are any more details. And a few hours later, Dennis Burke emails Monty Wilkinson, the deputy chief of staff, again and says the guns that were found at the murder scene were a part of that operation that we were going to talk about. And then Wilkinson responds with, I'll call you tomorrow. Now Dennis Burke says he can't recall any conversation he had with Wilkinson. Wilkinson says he can't recall any conversation that he had with Burke or Eric Holder. But clearly, Dr. Hawkins, this is something, I mean, these are details that you would expect the deputy chief of staff to pass on to the Attorney General.
Oh, you're exactly right. And, and I'm not being smart aleck, but regardless of what they can recall, we have the hard copy. We have the email. We know the exchanges took place to at least the level that you just recited. And so they can't deny that. They can't deny that that information was shared and that there was a plan to share even more information in a conversation. Now, they can say the conversation never took place afterward. I'm sure perhaps the right phone records could be found, and we would be able to prove or disprove that. But we know without doubt the communication took place via email, and they can run, but they can't hide on that issue.
No, I think you're right. Now, one of the other issues that has popped up today is Representative Issa telling Eric Holder, he's mentioned this before, but Issa says now you turn over the documents or contempt of Congress. And we're talking about, it's amazing the documents that have been requested versus the documents that have been turned over. And the Justice Department and the Obama administration has said time and time again how helpful they've been, how above board they have been. They've gone above and beyond what they have been required to do, Eric Holder said the last time he testified. And then today, Darrell Issa says, you know what? There are like 74,000 documents that we've requested that have yet to be turned over by the Justice Department. We've only gotten like 6,000 documents of the documents that we've requested. And so, once again, the narrative that the Obama administration has been trying to craft that they don't have anything to hide, that they've been cooperating fully with this investigation, it really doesn't, it just doesn't hold up to water.
No, it doesn't. And again, the fact that makes that evident is that this document dump Friday, that one dump alone, has opened so many doors, from the email exchange you mentioned between Burke and Wilkinson to also the admission that Lanny Brewer suggested gun walking as a tactic to catch cartel members and to catch gun smugglers. He suggested that straw purchasers be allowed to purchase and transport guns across the border. And then once they transported, for them to be arrested, that would be a means of law enforcement. That was in the document dump. This one dump has given us all this information, and if we've gotten that much information out of this little dump on one night, what else could we get out of the other 74,000 pages?
Well, absolutely right. And, since we have so many documents outstanding, it seems kind of silly to write a report based on the 6,000 documents that have been turned over and what we know to date, assuming that you can wrap up the Fast and Furious investigation, put a pretty little bow on it, and say that it's complete. And yet that's exactly what we saw Representative Elijah Cummings and the Democrats on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee do today. They released a report, in essence, blaming Fast and Furious on low-level staffers in Arizona, saying this went back to the Bush administration and that the Obama administration has done nothing wrong whatsoever, which, look, we'll see what a full and complete accounting of Fast and Furious shows. But I got to tell you, Dr. Hawkins, I mean, to make that claim right now, knowing what we know, just seems laughable.
Oh, I agree. It's 100% laughable. And every time they talk about tying it back to Bush, what they're depending on or trusting in, they're trusting in the ignorance of the American population. I don't say that critically, but the media kept the American population in the dark. And so they don't understand that the operation that Bush ran was an operation that had maybe 300 guns, 500 guns at the most. It was a well-organized operation done in cooperation with the Mexican government. That's the big difference. The Mexican government was in on it. With what we've done with Fast and Furious, the Mexican government was blindsided. It was 2,500 plus weapons. None of them were traced. Paul Gosar, Congressman Gosar, said 2 were traced. So 2 out of 2,500 were traced. This is a train wreck. There's no comparison between the two.
No, there's not. And, it's amazing that we still see the defenders of this administration trying to talk about these operations that took place during the Bush administration, including one, again, where apparently Mexican law enforcement was notified and they failed to show up and interdict the guns, comparing that to Operation Fast and Furious, where, again, we're talking about thousands of firearms over well over a year that this investigation took place. As you said, Lanny Brewer, the head of the criminal division, became aware of the gun walking in June of 2010 and apparently didn't say anything to anybody about it. It's just, again, I just go back to the word laughable. It's just kind of, it's kind of sad in a way that, that this is, I guess, the pregame for Eric Holder's appearance on Thursday, the release of this report trying to exonerate the Justice Department before some really tough questions get asked of the Attorney General.
Oh, you're right, and I think you framed it perfectly, Cam, because now this is just how I see it, but the way I see it, if you go back to when Holder moved Emory Hurley. He moved him from his position in Phoenix to another position. He had Kenneth Melson step down from his position. He was acting director of the ATF, moved him to another position, and Dennis Burke resigned. So those are 2 members within the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona who their positions changed, and then the ATF director's positions changed. That was in August, and it was clear that Holder's intent was, if we make this small move, ISA will back off, everyone will be satisfied, and they'll let this go. Well, it didn't work. I think that was the same thing he had planned Friday. Friday, he realizes, I'm going to have to appear before Congress. They're going to ask tough questions. We'll drop these documents. We'll let them know this much, and they'll be satisfied. But instead, ISA has taken the next step, as you said, and said, nope, that's not enough. Give me all of them, or I'll hold you in contempt. So I think we get down to what I've called 0 hour on Thursday, and we could see some fireworks.
I think we will see some fireworks. I mean, I think we saw some the last time that Holder and ISA squared off at the House Judiciary Committee hearing. And again, one of the issues was the documents that Justice was turning over. And Representative ISA went after Holder at that point and said, look, we've asked for these documents. We want these documents. You don't have the right to simply say you're not going to give them to us. And Holder's response was, well, we've determined that the documents that were dated February 4th, 2011 and on, we're not going to turn over, and it could not provide a constitutional reason to withhold those documents from Congress, and Representative Issa pointed that out. And, I think we, honestly, Dr. Hawkins, I think we may see on Thursday, depending on how combative the Attorney General wants to be, we may end up seeing a real debate over whether or not the Justice Department can continue to keep these documents from Congress and ultimately from the public.
Well, I think you're exactly right. Well, we've got some lines drawn in the sand that are not the kind that you can erase and move. ISA has been clear that if not by the 9th, you will face charges, contempt of Congress. And so we have some lines in the sand, and they're going to be working on the 2nd in front of the nation. Everyone who watches is going to see these two men go head-to-head over this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be interesting. And I was going to say a while ago, for any of your listeners who haven't read about what ICE said about the possible contempt charges, I have a piece coming out tomorrow morning on Big Government on that, and it's not a big piece. It doesn't have a lot of groundbreaking news. It's just a summary of what ICE said and the fact that he has told Holder, listen, you give us the rest of the documents or we'll charge you with contempt.
Talking to Dr. AWR Hawkins from BigGovernment.com. Dr. Hawkins, thank you again, sir, for coming on the program, and I know we'll be talking again very soon.
Thank you, Cam. God bless.
All right, you have a good night, sir. More and more about Operation Fast and Furious and what this Justice Department has done. The idea that this is not going to have any sort of impact in the general election, I think, looks increasingly silly. I think the only thing that's going to keep...
I would say you probably share this opinion. Since Friday of last week, which was the last document dump for the DOJ, it seems like we've learned more in these last 4 days than perhaps we've learned in the last 4 weeks. And
this from being an issue in the general election is if the mainstream media continues to do the shoddy job of reporting that they've been doing.
Oh, I agree with you, Cam. Good evening.
Good evening.
I think things are turning, though. I mean, as I've looked...
Right now, joining us from BigGovernment.com, very pleased to have with us Dr. AWR Hawkins, as we take another look at an issue that so far has not played much of a role in the presidential primaries, but I got to say, Dr. Hawkins, as we learn...
maybe even the last 2 months, and the things we've learned are so significant that I believe the pressure has ratcheted up considerably on Holder.
I would agree with you, and I think that the Friday night document dump that we saw from the Justice Department